All right, so are you ready for a deep dive into something a little different? Today, we're looking at some stuff you've been working on learning English.
Yeah.
And the source material you provided is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 2 YouTube videos
Okay.
from a channel called Speak English Smartly.
Interesting.
It seems like a pretty standard channel for beginners,
Uh-huh.
but there's a twist
Okay.
to how they teach.
Yeah, it's quite clever, actually.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they've interwoven these really personal stories about big life changes into their conversational podcasts.
So it's not just like, here's how to conjugate a verb. It's
Exactly.
more like, here's how I use this phrase while navigating a real-life situation.
Exactly. And by doing that, they aren't just teaching vocabulary.
Right.
They're giving you insight into cultural nuances and these universal human experiences that we all share no matter what language we speak.
Yeah, and the first video features Anna,
Okay.
and she talks about buying her first house in the U.S. And she actually mentions that traditional English classes didn't really prepare her for the real world of contracts and negotiations.
I think that highlights a really important point the video makes.
Yeah.
Textbook English can only get you so far.
Yeah.
Real fluency isn't just about grammar, it's about being able to navigate everyday situations and conversations.
And that's exactly what Anna's story does.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about things like the U.S. rental process,
Mm-hmm.
what a down payment is, which she says is typically around 20%,
Wow.
and the challenges people, especially young people, face in today's market.
Yeah.
Makes you realize that even if you think you understand a concept,
Right.
actually experiencing something like buying a house
Mm-hmm.
reveals just how much complexity there is.
It definitely speaks to the economic realities of homeownership these days, particularly for younger generations.
Yeah.
A lot to consider there.
Now, this is where things get really interesting for me.
Okay.
Anna initially thought she could handle the whole home buying process on her own,
Oh, wow.
which honestly I can relate to.
Yeah.
But she quickly realized how important a realtor is in the U.S.
Yeah.
She even mentioned that apparently 98% of buyers use one.
Really?
I guess that goes to show how tricky the market can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like having a guide, a negotiator, and as Anna hilariously described it, your phone's best friend all rolled into one.
She said her realtor was calling her up to 10 times a day,
Oh my gosh.
setting up meetings, coordinating inspections, basically walking her through every step of the way.
Wow.
But then she mentioned something about a 6% commission that realtors get.
Okay.
And in her case, the seller covered it.
Interesting.
Is that standard practice or does it just depend on the market?
That's a great question and something worth thinking about.
Yeah.
There are a lot of factors that can come into play there.
Yeah.
Real estate is a pretty fascinating world when you get into the details.
That's for sure. Now, love those little details.
Yeah.
And Anna's description of the actual move had me cracking up.
Oh, really?
They ordered this huge truck,
Yeah.
but then parking was a nightmare.
Oh.
So they ended up having to haul everything, including a couch, a really long way.
Oh, no.
And all this while she was newly pregnant.
Oh, wow.
It sounded like a logistical puzzle gone wrong.
It did, but it's a perfect example of how these videos use humor to make the information stick.
Right.
Can you imagine trying to explain that scenario in a traditional English class?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have the same impact at all.
Not even close.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show how important real-world practice is,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have to explain a complicated situation like that in a language you're still learning.
It really highlights the power of storytelling in language learning.
Yeah.
It makes the vocabulary more memorable and forges this emotional connection that helps with learning.
Okay, so let's switch gears to the second video.
Yep.
This one features Marco,
All right.
and he talks about something that I think a lot of us can relate to no matter what language we speak.
Okay.
Overthinking.
Yeah.
He talks about feeling pressured from family
Hmm.
and comparing himself to friends on social media, which, honestly, who hasn't felt that way at some point?
Right. And it's so interesting that even native English speakers struggle with these common issues.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder that language learning is also about self-improvement and relating to the human experience.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Marco talks about feeling frustrated and sad,
Mm-hmm.
comparing himself to friends who are always posting those perfect couple photos.
And it's important to note that in the video, Elena, the other host, doesn't dismiss his feelings at all.
Yeah, that's good.
She validates his experience while gently reminding him that social media often presents a very curated, idealized version of reality.
She makes a good point.
Yeah.
People tend to only highlight the best parts of their lives.
Right.
It's easy to forget that what we see online isn't always the full picture.
It definitely ties back to the idea that to really understand a culture, you need to go beyond the surface and engage with those complexities and nuances of the human experience
Yeah.
we're more alike than we sometimes think.
I completely agree. So Marco and Elena start discussing some practical techniques for managing this overthinking.
Mm.
First, they talk about identifying your triggers.
Okay.
What are the specific situations, thoughts, or feelings that tend to send you down that rabbit hole of overthinking?
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's such a crucial first step
Uh-huh.
because once you know what those triggers are,
Yeah.
you can start to develop strategies for dealing with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about becoming more aware of your own thought patterns.
Yeah, it really is. So once you've identified those triggers,
Okay.
what's next?
Well, Marco and Elena talk about the importance of challenging those irrational thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So when you find yourself spiraling, ask yourself, is this thought based on facts, or is it being fueled by my anxieties and insecurities?
Okay.
That's where you start to separate reality from those negative thought spirals.
That makes a lot of sense, but sometimes those negative thoughts can be so persistent.
Right.
It's like they have a life of their own.
Right. And that's why the third step they talk about is so important.
Yeah.
Reframing those thoughts in a more positive and constructive light.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about denying your feelings, but about shifting your perspective.
Okay.
Instead of dwelling on problems, focus on finding solutions.
So it's like learning to talk back to that inner critic,
Exactly.
right? To challenge those negative thought patterns and replace them with something more helpful.
And that's a skill that can be incredibly valuable, not just for managing overthinking, but for any challenge you face in life,
Yeah.
including learning a new language.
Well-
It's about developing a more resilient and optimistic mindset.
I love how they've tied that into the language learning process.
Yeah.
It shows that it's not just about memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules,
Mm-hmm.
but also about personal growth and developing those mental tools that can help you succeed in all areas of life.
Exactly.
And speaking of language learning, didn't they also cover a couple of specific phrases in this video,
Yes, they actually break down the difference between on time and in time. Oh, yeah.
which is a common point of confusion for English learners?
Oh, absolutely. I remember struggling with that myself when I was first learning English.
Yeah.
So can you explain the distinction?
Of course, on time means arriving at the exact designated time.
Okay.
Like if your flight is scheduled to depart at 10:00 a.m. and you arrive at the gate at 10:00 a.m.,
Mm-hmm.
you're on time.
Got it. But what about in time?
In time implies that you have a buffer, that you arrive early enough to avoid being late.
Okay.
So if you arrive at the airport early enough to check in, go through security, and maybe grab a coffee before your 10 a.m. flight,
Yeah.
you're in time.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's all about the context.
It is, and those subtle distinctions are what make language so fascinating, but also challenging at times.
Mm-hmm.
They also touched on phrases for politely asking someone to repeat something if you didn't quite catch it,
Right.
and for expressing gratitude, which are obviously essential in any language.
Especially in those real life situations where you're trying to navigate a conversation and make a good impression.
It's those little phrases that can really make a difference now, going back to Marco's overthinking.
Yeah.
He mentioned feeling a bit anxious about talking to his family about his mental health struggles.
Mm.
He was worried about being judged or disappointing them.
Mm-hmm.
That must be a tough situation to be in.
It is, and it highlights a cultural dimension that's important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
In some cultures, there's a stigma associated with mental health issues,
Right.
which can make it very difficult for people to open up and seek support.
It's a good reminder that communication isn't just about the words we use,
Right.
but also about understanding those cultural sensitivities, being aware of unspoken cues, and respecting different perspectives.
Absolutely, and that's something to be mindful of, especially when you're learning a new language and interacting with people from diverse cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, for sure. So to wrap things up, these videos do a fantastic job of blending language lessons with personal stories and practical advice. It's such a refreshing approach to language learning, making it more engaging and relatable for the learner.
Mm-hmm.
I especially love how they weave in those everyday life topics.
Yeah,
It makes the learning process so much more meaningful.
I agree, and I think it encourages learners to view language as more than just a set of rules.
Right.
It's a tool for connecting with others, sharing experiences, and ultimately better understanding ourselves and the world around us.
It's amazing how they've managed to create these really personal and insightful videos that are still focused on teaching English.
Yeah.
They don't shy away from those real-life struggles,
Mm.
and I think that's what makes them so relatable.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just showing that language learning isn't just about textbooks and exams.
Mhm.
It's about connecting with people, understanding their stories, and navigating the complexities of everyday life.
And they also give you a glimpse into aspects of American culture that you might not get from a traditional language course, like we've talked about real estate. But they also touch on social anxieties or on mental health, which is something you might not think about when you're first starting to learn a language.
That's so true. It's a reminder that language is deeply intertwined with culture.
Yeah.
And to truly become fluent, you need to understand those cultural nuances and perspectives.
I think it's fascinating how a simple story about buying a house can reveal so much about the cultural norms and values of a society.
Right.
It's like a window into a different world.
And those stories are what make the learning process so engaging and memorable.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that a deep dive into down payments and moving mishaps could be so entertaining?
Right. It just goes to show the power of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
When you can connect those language lessons to relatable narratives, it becomes so much easier to absorb the information.
Yeah.
Speaking of memorable, I'm still thinking about Anna and those movers having to park blocks away and haul all that furniture.
Oh, yeah.
Must have been quite a workout.
It sounds like it. And, sometimes those unexpected and even chaotic moments are the ones that stick with us the most.
Yeah.
They force us to think on our feet, to improvise, and to really put our language skills to the test.
Absolutely. It's like trial by fire.
Yeah.
And I bet Anna learned more practical English in those few hours of moving madness than she ever could have from a textbook.
I'd say, so it's a reminder that the best language teachers are often those real-life experiences that push us outside of our comfort zones and challenge us to adapt.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Speak English Smartly, I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of finding those learning experiences that go beyond the traditional classroom setting.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Embrace those real-life interactions, immerse yourself in different cultures, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because when you approach language learning with a sense of adventure and curiosity, it becomes so much more than just memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary lists. It becomes a journey of self-discovery and a way to connect with the world around you on a deeper, more meaningful level.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe you'll even pick up some tips on how to navigate the U.S. real estate market along the way.